Second anniversary. Doesn't time go fast? This video, last year I know I probably got on my polemical a bit about drug use and drug abusing and all sorts of other things. This year I'm not. And I talk about something a lot more personal, about the loss of our hero, Mr. Prince Rogers Nelson. I'm doing this in advance because I'm working a lot this weekend, so that I'm actually recording this a couple of hours before we actually do the proper anniversary over in the States. When it happened in New Zealand, it was actually about 2:30 in the morning on April the 22nd. At the moment it's 9 o'clock in the morning on April the 21st here. I've got the light on because even though it's daylight, unlike all you people in the Northern Hemisphere where it's clearly spring now, New Zealand it's actually moving deeply into autumn. And even though it's daylight, it's very cloudy and it's not so much cold in our autumns and winters here, just very, very wet and overcast. Anyway, back to Prince. Today I'm going to talk about something different, and I think Jay and Mr. Ants have kind of hit on this, and this is about becoming a fan of Prince and early Prince days. I'm just holding up some of these millions of cash-in magazines that came out in the lead after his death. Here we are, got to. The Source one's pretty good. This one not so, only about 10 pages, and the rest is all the usual, you know, sort of long-haired British alternative bands that absolutely nobody's ever heard of, you know. All these like groups like the Fratellis and Franz Ferdinand and all these other guys who've got thicker lips than me and long hippie hair even though they're white. Yep. But Mojo, by far the most disappointing magazine that came out, was showed Bob Dylan on the cover, and that actually caused a storm of complaints. Yep. Okay, Uncut, which did a much better job, basically. And one of the better tabloids, in this case the Daily Mirror, which is the only tabloid which hasn't really pissed me off this time. Now we're going to talk about tabloids because I'll just get it out of the way very quickly, but it is not the theme of my video. There have been some photos released showing drug abuse in Paisley Park. They weren't on the Prince org because I've been shot off the Prince org now for talking about the Jewish gossip industry, and I've got deep shit for that. But I mean, I'd had several warnings and strikes. There's a lot of very angry Amira Bushraka type sisters there who seem to think that everything African American people do is gold, and if you don't agree with that, well, you're basically a Nazi and a racist. Which is interesting because that's the theme of today's talk as well. But there are some photos showing Prince in the vault. Apparently Prince's vault, and one of them shows what looks like a white powder surrounded by a spoon and a cherry. I suspect that photo is probably doctored. I doubt Prince was... I've never known anyone to use painkillers like cocaine for one thing, and the cherry is just kind of like, I think someone's just taking the mickey out of Prince, you know, because he was a bit esoterical. And another one shows the vault, which is actually quite interesting. It shows all these tapes, and another one shows a plastic pouch saying opium, and inside's all this cash and written numbers with drug orders on it. Apparently, again, I'm not sure if this is all Prince or this is planted, but it's the Daily Mail with a collaboration of TMZ that published these photos. I'm going to judge Prince for his drug use because I don't really think that it was him. There's also a photo of some bottles. The only one that truly links him to drugs is there are some photos of painkiller bottles which are dated 20th of April 2016, the day before he died, and they contain diazepam, which is the same stuff that killed Michael Jackson, basically. But yeah, it's pretty much a sleazy photo session, you know what I mean, intruding the privacy. I'm not going to tell you where they are, but they're on the net. I'm not going to show them. I'm not that tasteless, you know, we're in grieving here. But now, so that's the news, and of course this is what the media does every time someone has an anniversary. You all might remember back in 2016 on the 7th anniversary of Prince's death, they showed those, Michael Jackson's death, they released that ancient story about some pornographic photo books from Michael Jackson's Neverland estate, which actually turned out to be some harmless photography books that a fan had given Michael years ago, and there was evidence that Michael had never even opened the things or looked at them. And of course they all basically, the story actually faded away after a couple of days, but not after every single newspaper in the world decided they'd run it. Fortunately, this has not happened with the Prince allegations, and that these sleazoids should be shot to bits. Now, personal stuff. In an earlier video, I told you about how happy I was that I was a big Prince fan. Yes, that's who you think it is right there on stage. Now, this is a very old photo. This photo is well over 20 years old now. It's actually from the days before digital cameras, as you can see. Basically, I just want to talk briefly about my time being a Prince fan. Back in 1991, when I discovered Prince, I was a bit of a loner at school, you know. I don't want sympathy and people crying their hearts out over this. I mean, I grew up, I went through it, I don't care. Basically, I grew up in a very rural part of New Zealand. I live in Auckland now, which is the most cosmopolitan and open city in the world. in this part of the world at least. But I grew up in an area outside of Christchurch, New Zealand, which was very rural, very backwards, very conservative, and very, very racist. The school I went to was 99% white, basically. And I know you're looking at me thinking, what? But I mean, when I say white, I mean working class Irish and English ancestry people. Most of them farmers. Most of them would leave school virtually on their 15th birthday, because they had farms to go into. Wealthy area. Most of the kids had their driver's licenses on their 15th birthday. They were drinking, they were having sex with girls by the time they were 15 in the fourth form. And I didn't fit the mold. Basically, I was a real little tearaway at primary school, but when I got to high school I was a real little geek, basically. I mean, I knew I was gay, the school knew I was gay, but I didn't come out until I got to university. And basically, if I had come out, I mean, I probably would have been hung from the nearest tree. That's how bad the school was. It was like Alabama in 1950. I mean, the school was complete shit. I'm not going to mention the name of the school because it's completely changed its image now. It's Christchurch has grown a lot since the 1990s. The town I grew up in, Rolleston, had a population of under 1,000 people in 1995. Because of the earthquakes and because of its proximity to Christchurch, Rolleston now has a population of 25,000 people, and it's actually a city almost. And that's actually the ironic thing. But it's still got the same small town values, basically. That's why I'm here in Auckland. So yeah. So what happened though was, when I got into Prince, people thought I was gay and I was a faggot, and only poofters liked Prince, and Prince was a freak. They all listened to redneck rock music like Guns N' Roses and Nirvana and all that sort of hair metal stuff. In those days, the only people who liked rap music were basically what they called the N-word and dumb Marys and all this type of shit. You know, they didn't, any music by a Negro artist was considered bad at our school. It was like real Yarmacraw, Alabama type stuff. And anyway, but people used to laugh at me, and then finally my last year of school, 7th form, which is now year 13 or grade 12 in America, I don't know what it is in Britain, I think it's the upper 6. But was when I started to make some friends, because I think kids grow up by that stage and people become a lot less judgmental. And what happened was we had a lip syncing competition, and basically anyone could enter, boys, girls, groups, whatever, and I decided that I would get up on stage and do a Prince song. And of course I was lip syncing, and it was absolutely hilarious. I actually got a pair of old purple track pants, which my mum had lying around. I got my old school shirt, because by this stage we're in mufti, so I just got the shirt, and I actually sewed a lace ruff onto it and wore what, I don't even know where I got that vest from, and I made a guitar out of cardboard, and I used a plastic ruler to back it as a fretstock, because I couldn't play the guitar back then. And several girls jumped up on stage with me and actually were my Princettes, as they called themselves. And I didn't lip sync, I actually sang the song Kiss. And of course, after standing and singing like in this photo here, I mean, I actually got down on the floor of this old wooden stage at our high school and started humping the floor and humping the plastic guitar. And then one of my friends jumped on stage with a real guitar. It was like some sort of Gibson, and he started playing it, and he had this blonde wig on. And he told me he was Wendy, even though he'd never seen a picture of Wendy before. I tried to tell that Wendy was a lesbian and she had dark hair. And it was just so funny. And anyway, I got second and won $50 for my efforts. And this is back in 1994 when I just turned 18. As you can see, I was probably singing something like, "You don't have to watch Dynasty to have an attitude." And this was actually a really hard time for Prince too, because this was like early 94. So this is like when Prince has, got Slave on his cheek, and it's before he's released, I think it was before he released Come, but he had released the hits. So I think a few people still kind of knew who he was because of the hits. And it was the time when The Most Beautiful Girl was a hit, basically. But yeah, this photo is definitely my funniest Prince memory. Now, I dare everyone else, Jay, Mr. Ants, if you've got a really old Prince photo, you need to show it, because at the moment, I mean, don't you think this shit is just hilarious? You get a close-up of that purple. But anyway, so there's my earliest memories of Prince. Once after that, high school wasn't quite so hard. I went to university the year after. I really should have taken some time off. And when I got to Dunedin, there was the same homophobia and other crap. That's when I got into drag. But I haven't got any, I'm not going to show you any drag queen photos, but often when I was doing drag, I'd lip sync to Prince songs, namely When Doves Cry, 1999, and later on The Most Beautiful Girl in the World, because that's, well, when you're dressed up as a drag queen, you're taking the piss out of it, And then after that, well, what can I say? When I got there in 95, I mean, that's when I was living in Dunedin. I had all this money by my own. In those days, they used to give these student loans of these big bloody living supplements. And I'd actually worked all summer, so I actually had all the money to pay for my living costs. So I just had all this money to spend, which was really stupid. I shouldn't have touched it. because now I wouldn't be owing millions of dollars today. But I just went out and bought every single Prince album and every Prince vinyl, every Prince related thing I could find. 95 was just the year I just accumulated. And there you are. So that's my Prince memory. Back at this time, 1994-95, no one would have ever had any idea that Prince was not well. And I think that we'd all be shocked now. But finally, just to talk about this drugs thing, I honestly don't think Prince was a hardcore drug addict. I think those photos were staged. I think what happened was Prince was probably taking painkillers, and probably someone gave him that horrible shot of fentanyl that killed him. I just don't see Prince as an habitual drug addict. If he was, it happened well after this time. It probably happened like from the 2010s onwards. I mean, Prince, Michael Jackson, all those people, they were people I kind of grew up, you know, they always had this attitude towards drugs, like, don't do them, man. And that's just how I felt. But everyone else, I'm feeling your pain. It's been 2 years since we lost the greatest musical artist of all time. And one of these two I'm talking about here, not the guy in the very bad pair of purple track pants. Okay, so yeah, that's my video. My thoughts are all with you today. You know, shout out to everybody who's in Minneapolis at that Prince conference. God, I'd love to be there. I'm missing that. They got this really cool title which shows like Prince with this purple afro and there's like all these villages and shit growing out of it, which is quite funny. Yeah, so 2 years, you know, and may you live to see the dawn, because Prince already has.